It's received after that. Okay, because you've got ballots coming in on election day while they're being processed. You add those two together once the polls are closed and you've got your total number of ballots received on election day. You add those two numbers together, and that should be the total of ballots that you have sitting here. If they don't match, your phone call is to the clerk and say, why don't they match? Do you have envelopes that didn't sitting on your desk that didn't get scanned? There is a method of going through the entire pile of envelopes to make sure every single one of them is scanned, and it does take some time. But in order to be able to make the mathematical corrections, how do you know, is my list of voters right, or is my number of ballots right? So you try to get, if there's any updates that need to be made to that list of voters, you try to make sure you've got that correct number to start from. Does that help?
That does help. Now, is it possible for someone to, let's say we're doing an investigation audit, can we see the original poll book as well as the revised version, or is only the revised version out there?
My understanding is that staff retains the original list and the revised list.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Representative LeGrand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So help me understand this, because I've been involved in recounts in my county, and we have exactly, this issue is pretty much universal. Like, it's a question of ratios change, but like nobody has 100% balanced precincts. And we heard testimony in the committee about that previously. My understanding was that you could recount if your tabulated number equals the number of paper ballots you have. Not that it has to equal the poll book. Am I wrong on that? And if that's true, then I think you can recount a whole lot more than the 71. You're saying 70% of them roughly can't be recounted?
Yeah,
I don't think that's right.
my understanding is that the votes, the people cast must match the votes cast. And then once you open it up, you count the paper ballots, and the paper ballots have to match the ballots cast.
Correct, but then that makes that recountable. In other words, if there's a tension with the poll book at that point, it doesn't make that an unrecountable precinct.
But in order to open the seal, my understanding is that they have to match.
Okay, that's not my understanding, but there's no point in us debating, since neither one of us, we'd have to appeal to a higher authority on that one. But that's not my understanding, for what it's worth, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative. All right, that's what the questions we have. So, thank you for coming today. Oh no, Representative Lefebvre. Sorry, I'm keeping. We've had so many people testify. I have so many tallies, so I missed that one. So, Representative Lefebvre, thanks for waiting. Please, when you're ready, ask your question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We talk about big boxes. These big metal boxes that had the stamp of approval or not by the Board of Canvassers. What are these boxes? What are they for? How big are they? This is multiple questions, I'm sorry. Tell me about the boxes, how big they are, how many ballots there are, potentially in each one of them, and what they're for.
Okay. So the boxes are about this tall, about this wide. There was a batch of 50 new boxes purchased by the city of Detroit from Election Source, and roughly 30 of those boxes were defective. They're metal, and there's two sides that meet along the back, and the welds were not done properly, so there's a gap along the back seam. We rejected about 30 of those. Sometime before the November election, they did bring us some repaired containers, and we went through them and then took the red do not use tags off and put certified labels on those. But if I remember correctly, there were only 24, and I could be off by one or two, 24 that came back repaired. As to how many ballots were in those containers, I would have to ask staff. I would maybe look online. I have the precinct number, or the absentee counting board numbers, but I don't have the associated ballot counts with those counting boards. Does that answer all of your question?
Well, I only get one, so I would just like to say, I mean, if you buy 50 boxes and 30 of them are defective, let's never buy from that company again.
All right. Thank you, Monica. That's the last question for you. We appreciate you coming to testify. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. With that, Mr. Giuliani, we'll let you make your, any closing remarks you have. And it is an hour over what I said it was going to be. Sorry about that, everybody. But we wanted to hear these people. I know that many feel that these people haven't been heard. And so we wanted to provide an opportunity for people to bring forward their stories and be heard, and we've tried to do that today, as did the Senate, I think, yesterday very well, the Senate Oversight Committee. But we wanted to offer you an opportunity to speak, and then I will let each member ask you a question. All right? So go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, this represents the affidavits of the witnesses that we didn't have the time to call.
I make sure that button's
I'm
pushed.
sorry.
Thanks. Go ahead.
This represents the affidavits of the people that we didn't get a chance to call. There are hundreds of them, and they specifically allege similar acts of fraud, very similar to the witnesses that you heard. I find it puzzling that there seems to be such confusion about it. Maybe because of my background as a prosecutor, it's pretty obvious to me what happened here. The Democratic leader in Pittsburgh, in Pennsylvania, or in Philadelphia, or in Detroit, or in Las Vegas, or in Phoenix, or in Milwaukee, or in Minneapolis, or in Atlanta, didn't wake up on election morning when all those mail ballots were going to come in and decide we're going to shut out all the Republican poll watchers, or as many as we can. I mean, we've been counting absentee ballots forever. I did it myself when I was a young lawyer. Republican sits on one side, Democrat sits on the other side. We don't have any problem with it. This was uniform shutting out of as many Republicans as possible. In Pennsylvania, 890,000 ballots were cast secretly, with no Republican getting a chance to take a look at the ballot. And in Pennsylvania, there are 600,000 more votes counted, mail votes counted, than mail ballots they can find. This is a swindle. It's a con job. It's a theft of an election. And it was carried out by the same method in the city of Detroit. And with all due respect to Detroit, in several analyses of corrupt cities, my city, New York, comes ahead of Detroit. So I'm not saying this with any pride, but it happens to be one of the most corrupt cities in the United States. On any measure, I just checked online here, it comes in 4th, 5th, 3rd, 7th, 8th. Several times New York comes in ahead. So I wonder why the confusion about what happened. They stole the election. Not the first one they stole. Not the last one they're going to steal unless you do something about it. But you do something real. Not, let's see how we're going to fix it. You've been fixing it for years. And it hasn't gotten fixed. They've been stealing elections for years. And this time, they got a chance to steal it really big because of the ridiculous mail ballot that was created. Back in 1960, the mayor of Chicago, the most corrupt city in America, by the way, just in case, on all the lists, by far, we can all feel better. Chicago's the most corrupt. He helped to steal the 1960 election by holding back the ballots in Chicago so the Republican ballots would come in, and then along with a gentleman named Sam Giancana, they got the ballots they needed to elect their candidate. Last year, 2 years ago in Florida, the same thing happened in Palm Beach and Broward County. It was a 2-point election, Senate, governor. Palm Beach County took 2.5 weeks to report. And finally it ended when they caught a truck like the one coming from Bayport, New York to Philadelphia. They caught a truck in Jacksonville headed to Palm Beach with 100,000 ballots that pretended to be Palm Beach ballots, but they were done up in Jacksonville. And then they had to end the election, and they prosecuted the people in Palm Beach. And remember, this year, we had no problem in Florida. I mean, you were counting for an eternity. Florida was over with that night because the governor had the courage to straighten it out. He had the courage to prosecute the people who committed the fraud. You don't end fraud by prospective measures to deal with fraud. You know how you end fraud? You put criminals in jail. That's how you end fraud. You have the courage. You have the courage to say that certification that was done by your state is a complete phony. It's a false statement made to the United States government. Those are prosecutable, by the way. That's not the vote by any means in Michigan. That's not the vote in Michigan. I don't know what the vote in Michigan is, but it's at least 300,000 or 400,000 votes off from what the real vote in Michigan is. And you heard the anger and the upset of your citizens. They seem to have more passion about it than you do. They figured out what happens because they live on the street. They know what happens in Detroit. Don't scratch your head about what happens in Detroit. They steal elections in Detroit.
Representative, you'll have an
And
opportunity.
they steal elections in New York, and they steal elections in Boston, and they steal elections in Philadelphia. And the Democrats were smart enough to pick 10 corrupt cities to play their game out. 10 cities in which they could get away with it. 10 cities in which they could go into court and find a hack judge that will decide anything they want. So, I mean, we can live in this strange world all we want, but we're getting at the point where our freedoms are beginning to be eroded. Our right of free speech has been eroded substantially by the censorship imposed by big tech, big media, big corporations, and the Democrat Party. Our right of freedom of religion, with the ridiculous dictatorial way in which the COVID regulations are imposed on us, like they like to be dictators, these Democrat governors, they're taking away our right of the freedom of religion. Those are basically the two reasons we founded this country. Oh, by the way, there was a third, the right to freely and honestly elect our government. And they're taking that away from us too. It should not go without notice. And you should spend time taking a look at Pennsylvania. Look at Philadelphia. Look at Pittsburgh. Look at how eerily similar it is to what these people testified to. Read the rest of these and see that there are hundreds of people that back them up. That election center in Detroit was a disgrace. You should be ashamed of it as citizens of Michigan. I would be ashamed of it if it was in New York, and it could easily be in New York. And I would do everything in my power to make sure it never happened again. And I would never certify an election or have my name associated with anything that was false. Now, it is your responsibility to do that. Not the governor, not the Secretary of State. You were given that responsibility by our founding fathers. They decided who would be the final arbiter, who should overlook a presidential election. And in Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2, the power is given to you. In the McPherson case in 1892, the United States Supreme Court made clear that you can take that power back any time you want to. Yes. Anytime. You can take it back tonight. You can take it back the day before the electors go down to Washington. You can take it back any time you want. And in case you think it's old law, it was reiterated in Bush v. Gore. You have the right to take it back. You are the final arbiter of how honest or not your election is in your state. And it's your responsibility to stand up to that. And all I can tell you is, we let them get away with this. I don't know what happens after this. This was a concerted plan to fix this election. There's no way that Donald Trump was ahead by 800,000 votes going to bed at night, that he was ahead here by 300,000 votes, that he was ahead in Wisconsin by 400,000 votes, that he was ahead in every state, that over a 4 or 5 day period with this ridiculously corrupt system of counting, they turned around with ballots coming in the back door, ballots being driven down from New York. There's no way that this wasn't stolen. And what it takes is courage. Courage. Not to be afraid of what's happened to these poor people. They've got guts to stand up to what the Democrats do to them. And it's not just the wild and crazy left-wing Democrats who do it. They do it as a way of bullying us. You can see their behavior in this hearing. I can see the difference in behavior between two sides. Maybe sometimes we're too nice. Maybe sometimes we're too decent. Or maybe we shouldn't change. But one thing we should have is we have the ability to defend ourselves and not let our people get kicked around the way those Republicans were kicked around. They wouldn't let it happen, and we shouldn't let it happen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. With that, and I ask the crowd, let's be respectful. I've